Before we get into today's video, please quickly check below to see if you've subscribed. It's totally free and allows you to never miss one of our videos. Not even in his wildest dreams could Hidali have imagined the disaster he would witness when he accepted the position of bodyguard for an Azarian tycoon. At the time, he had no way of knowing how unprepared he was for the chaos that was about to unfold. The incident, as he would later understand, was caused by a single human father searching for his abducted daughter. It left a trail of bodies scattered across 3 star systems and marked a pivotal moment in galactic history. The first and last human abduction orchestrated by a Zaorian. Hidali wasn't present for the entirety of the chaos, arriving only in time to witness its conclusion. Yet the memories from the 68th Underground Interspecies Auction would haunt him for the rest of his life. It had begun innocently enough, with a job that seemed straightforward. Protect Olinu and ensure his safety during a high-profile transaction. Hidali hadn't asked questions. Ignorance had always seemed safer. But the moment he boarded Olinu's ship and learned they were heading to an underground auction on Edina, he knew this would be no ordinary day. Inside the ship, Hidali's white fur seemed unfit to the soft golden light of the ship's opulent interior, his wet pink snout struggling with the faint scent of exotic perfumes lingering in the air. His humble but muscular frame stood out against the lavish surroundings, every ripple of his muscular physique unhidden by clothing, save for a single belt slung low around his hips, ready to carry his guns. The room was dominated by Olinu's oversized seat, a grotesque throne designed not only to support his wide body, but to assert his dominance over everyone else in the space. As the Azarian tycoon shifted, the cushions beneath him sighing under the strain, his cold eyes settled on Hidali, appraising him like a tool meant to be tested. Olinu's voice echoed in his mind, dripping with the charm the tycoon wielded like a weapon. Hidali, Olinu had drawled, savoring the sound of the name. I'm going to take you somewhere nice today, a place a Rukal like you would never have the privilege of seeing. If you do a good job protecting me, he added, his tone as sweet and sharp as a carnivorous flower luring its prey, I might even buy you something expensive, something to show you my appreciation. The words made Hidali's white fur bristle, though he kept his expression neutral. To Olinu, he was nothing more than a tool. The tycoon's promises of generosity were not meant to inspire loyalty, but to remind Hidali of his inferior status as a Rukal, mere hired muscle with little wealth or prestige in the Federation. Hidali nodded silently, suppressing the urge to react. In hindsight, he realized the warning signs had been there all along, the smug satisfaction in Olinu's voice, the calculated way he dangled bait before him. That day, somewhere nice turned out to be a place where no one deserved to be. As he took a seat in Olinu's luxurious ship, Hidali's gaze faced the ground, a habit of his when he wanted to avoid angering someone. But Olinu's presence was impossible to ignore. The Azarian was extremely fat, though his species might have called it prosperous. His pink skin stretched taut over a round face, with loose folds sagging at his cheeks. Long-lobed ears drooped under the weight of extravagant ornaments, bands of rare metals and shimmering quartz that adorned him from head to neck. His tailored clothing, marked with insignias of high-status Azarian fashion, was a blatant display of wealth and power. Yet beneath the finery lay a crudeness that no adornment could mask. The journey to Edina was mostly silent, until Olinu spoke as they neared the planet. You know, Hidali, he said, his voice dripping with derision, it must be nice being a Rukal. No need for clothes, no concern for fashion, just fur. Hidali kept his gaze forward, masking the flicker of irritation the comment provoked. It wasn't just the words, but the tone. The quiet jab, meant to emphasize his simplicity and inferiority. He clenched his paws, letting the insult pass. When they landed on Edina, Olinu dismissed any pretense of subtlety. As the ship's ramp lowered, he turned to Hidali and waved a hand. "Guns are allowed where we're going. Take whatever you think you'll need from the arsenal." Hidali had silently complied, selecting a compact laser rifle and a sidearm from the storage compartment. It wasn't the first time he'd been given free rein to arm himself, but it always carried the same unspoken message. Whatever happened next, he was expected to handle it. Once they left the ship, Olinu led the way through Edina's crowded streets, his imposing figure cutting a path through the multi-species crowd. His ornaments caught the light, drawing stares and reinforcing his aura of wealth and power. As they entered the restaurant that served as a front to the underground auction venue, the stench of raw meat hit Hidali like a physical blow. The air was thick with the smell of blood and decay. Inside, Jaorian's staff glided through the room, carrying silver trays filled with meats Hidali couldn't identify. Some still wriggled, alive, as diners tore into them without hesitation. Olinu strode forward without flinching, his smirk widening as he moved past the tables and behind a counter like he owned the place. Hidali followed closely, his instincts on high alert, trying not to let the grotesque scene overwhelm him. The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as Olinu and Hidali moved deeper into the complex. The gaudy opulence of the entrance faded into stark utilitarianism, plain walls of cold metal lit by harsh recessed lights. Hidali noticed the Jaorian staff thinning out, their numbers dwindling with every step. The air grew heavier, not just with the silence, but with an underlying sense of something forbidden. They passed through rooms with high ceilings and intricate machinery, each one feeling more sterile and clinical than the last, until they finally stopped at a heavy metal door, adorned with a panel blinking with lights. Hidali immediately recognized the device, a genetic scanner. Before he could comment, Olinu barked out an order, his voice sharp and impatient. "Watch my back," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "If anyone stares too long, shoot to kill. No warnings." The Rukal's back stiffened at the command. Still, one of his claws slid toward his laser rifle. His senses sharpened, every noise and shadow in the corridor now amplified in his mind. Yet, as his gaze swept around, he found nothing out of place. No threat, no prying eyes. When his attention returned to Olinu, he caught the grotesque sight of a robotic tentacle protruding from the scanner. It extended toward Olinu, puncturing the Azarian's arm to collect a sample of blood. The scene sent a chill down Hidali's spine. This level of security was unsettling, far more alarming than if Olinu had outright demanded him to murder someone. His white fur bristled as the question surfaced in his mind. What kind of auction needed this level of protection? The door finally slid open with a hiss, and Hidali followed Olinu inside. The room beyond was stark and bare, a small cubic chamber bathed in what seemed natural moonlight. At its center stood a massive chair, clearly designed for someone of Olinu's girth. As Olinu moved to take his seat, the door sealed shut behind them with an ominous thud. Hidali's eyes took a moment to adjust to the low light. When they did, he realized the most striking feature of the room wasn't the chair, but the wall of glass in front of it. Through the glass, he could see what lay beyond, a vast cylindrical space, its ceiling a domed structure made entirely of glass. Moonlight streamed through the dome, casting an ethereal glow onto a circular stage below, the focal point of this cavernous chamber. Hidali's breath caught as he scanned the room. Their tiny alcove was just one of many, each tucked into the cylindrical wall. The layout made it clear. This wasn't just a room, but a viewing gallery, and they were not alone. Olinu, now seated comfortably in his oversized chair, turned to Hidali. "Those other bidders must be late," he grumbled, his voice heavy with irritation. "That's why the Jaorians haven't brought out the premium merchandise yet." The word merchandise sent an involuntary chill down Hidali's spine. He struggled to keep his face neutral, but the unease lingered.
"Who are the other bidders?"
he asked. Olinu let out a booming laugh, shaking his head as if Hidali had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "You really aren't that bright, are you?" Olinu sneered, his cold eyes glinting with amusement. "The glass walls aren't for decoration, stupid Rukal. They're to protect the bidders' identities. None of us want to know who the others are. Keeps things uncomplicated." Hidali clenched his jaw, silently cursing himself for not realizing sooner. Of course they wouldn't want to reveal their identities. Everything about it, the secrecy, the layers of security, screamed at the highest level of illegality. He felt foolish for not piecing it together earlier. This was perhaps an operation hidden from both the Federation and the local authorities. The genetic scanner, the cloaked identities of the bidders. It was all necessary to shield their identities from the law. His thoughts raced at the implications. Was Olinu here for weapons? Forbidden tech? Synthetic drugs? He wouldn't be surprised if it were the latter. The idea of being involved with it churned his stomach, but that was the life he chose, so he forced himself to remain composed. Hidali's unspoken questions were soon answered when a black door slid open beside the stage. From the darkness emerged a tall Jaorian, his figure lean and angular, exuding an air of unsettling confidence. He wore a robe of red-scaled leather with a texture that reflected in the moonlight. The garment struck a strange balance. It gave him an aura of opulence and secrecy, yet somehow his stride was confident. The hood of the robe concealed his face in shadow, adding an extra layer of mystery to his presence. With slow steps, the Jaorian made his way to the center of the stage. The faint rustle of his robe echoed faintly in the vast chamber, amplifying the weight of his arrival. Once he reached the center, he paused, standing perfectly still, as though savoring the silence. His head tilted slightly as he surveyed each alcove above, his gaze lingering just long enough to convey that he was aware of every pair of eyes aimed at him. The Jaorian finally broke the silence, his voice carrying a subtle authority that demanded attention.
"Good evening,"
he said.
"You may call me Askar. Of course, that is not my real name, but it will suffice for our purposes tonight."
He spread his arms wide, his long fingers extending beyond the red-scaled sleeves of his robe. The gesture seemed almost theatrical, but the confidence in his movements left no doubt that he was accustomed to commanding such attention.
"Welcome, esteemed guests,"
he continued, his voice echoing across the chamber,
"to the 68th edition of the Underground Interspecies Auction."
Olenu's laugh echoed through the small alcove, loud and obnoxious, making Hidali's fur bristle slightly. The Azarian leaned back in his oversized chair, his jeweled fingers tapping against the armrests as if savoring some private joke.
"Pay attention, Hidali,"
he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension.
"I've heard the goods this year are premium. You might even learn something about what true value looks like."
Hidali's mind churned at the word premium. What kind of goods required this level of secrecy and pomp? But before he could ask, Askar continued, his resonant voice drawing the focus back to the stage.
"Now,"
Askar said, his tone theatrical,
"it is my great pleasure to present the first item of tonight's auction, just to give you a taste of what we prepared for tonight."
Hidali's ears twitched as a second black door opened beside the stage. From the shadows emerged two more Jaorians, their movements slow as if to purposely build expectation. Both wore similar red-scaled robes, though less ornate than Askar's. In their hands they held the end of a long leash, the material seemingly just thin paper. At the other end of the leash, an immense figure stepped into view. Hidali's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. The green-muscled creature following the Jaorians was like nothing he had ever seen. A towering armored alien whose sheer size dwarfed the robed handlers. The light metallic creaks of its plating were like the soundtrack to its intimidating aura. Its gait was imposing, yet there was no hesitation, no resistance, as it followed the flimsy lead without protest. The incongruity of the scene unsettled Hidali deeply. The leash seemed deliberately fragile, laughably so clearly incapable of restraining something of this size. Yet the giant alien offered no resistance, no sign of the humiliation one might expect. It moved with an air of indifference, as though it had long accepted its role in this twisted display. Its stoic compliance made the scene all the more jarring, and Hidali's stomach twisted with unease. Askar's voice cut through the tense silence, his tone smooth and assured.
Yes, esteemed guests, your eyes do not deceive you,
He began, spreading his arms theatrically toward the towering figure on the stage.
What you see before you is a true marvel of genetic engineering, a member of the Varkrul species, an individual that has been altered even before its birth to be the perfect soldier.
He let the words hang for a moment, his sharp gaze sweeping the alcoves to gauge the reaction of his unseen audience.
But this,
He continued, his voice dripping with pride,
is no ordinary genetic engineering. No, this is a premium product, not a mindless brainwashed soldier ready to snap in violence as you might expect from lesser markets, but a specimen meticulously enhanced to exhibit unwavering obedience to its master.
Askar took a deliberate step closer to the towering alien, his crimson robe brushing the ground as he turned to face his audience once more.
And I do mean obedience,
he added teasingly, his lips curling into a knowing smile.
Allow me to prove it to you.
One of the Zaorians holding the leash stepped forward, handling a long, slender item to Ashkar. Hidali's sharp eyes caught the glint of the object as it changed hands. It was a metal rod, unassuming, but clearly designed for some specific purpose. Before Hidali could wonder further, the second Jaorian reached into his flowing red robe and, with a flourish that seemed rehearsed, produced a flame torch gun. The torch's bright flame flickered to life, illuminating the Jaorian's surroundings and adding an ominous orange glow to the theatrical scene. Askar approached the towering Varkral, the metal rod held in his outstretched hands. His voice was commanding, but eerily calm as he said,
"Take this."
The Varkral obeyed without hesitation, its massive hand dwarfing the metal rod as it gripped it firmly. Askar's expression sharpened with satisfaction as he turned his attention to the Jaorian holding the torch.
"Now,"
he said, his voice rising with theatrical energy,
"heat it."
The torch hissed as its flame roared to life, licking the surface of the rod. Hidali's breathing quickened with every second the flame danced over the metal. The rod began to glow faintly, and then more brightly, as it absorbed the intense heat. His mind raced, desperately searching for an explanation for this horrific display. Surely this is a bluff, he thought, refusing to believe that the Jaorians would take this demonstration further. But as the rod reached a glowing red-hot state, that hope crumbled.
"Now,"
Askar said smoothly, his tone as calm as if he were ordering tea,
"press it against your forehead."
Hidali's fur bristled in disbelief. his mind rejecting the command even as he heard it. Then, in a deep, gravelly voice that echoed through the chamber, the Vrakal responded,
"Yes, master."
Before Hidali could process the words, the Varkral raised the molten rod and pressed it against his own forehead. The sizzle was instantaneous, the sound sharp and visceral, cutting through the chamber like a blade. Hidali's nose flared as if the scent of burning could have crossed the glass and reached him, a sickening stench that seemed to claw at his stomach. He felt his knees weaken, bile rising in his throat as the sight and sound overwhelmed him. The sickening scene was made worse by Olinu's laughter, loud, uncontrolled, and grating.
"Unbelievable!"
Olinu bellowed, clapping his fat hands together.
"It actually obeyed. I might just have to buy it after all."
His words felt like a slap, jolting Hidali's already frayed nerves as he stared at the smoking, seared flesh on the Varkral's head. The display had crossed a line Hidali hadn't even realized existed, leaving him shaken to his core. This wasn't obedience. It was a grotesque mockery of life itself. Askar's smooth voice broke the tension, addressing the Varkral with an air of satisfaction.
"That will suffice,"
he said, his tone calm but commanding. The towering alien obeyed instantly, pulling the now cold rod away from its forehead. Smoke rose in faint wisps from the seared flesh, leaving a mark that made Hidali's stomach churn. Askar turned to face the alcoves, his arms outstretched in a grand gesture.
"Esteemed guests from across the galaxy, the bidding is now open for our first product of the evening."
Hidali's gaze dropped to his own furred hand, and he was startled to see it trembling. His claws flexed unconsciously, trying to stop the shaking. The urge to flee surged within him, his mind screaming to abandon Olinu and get as far away from this twisted place as possible. But before he could act, Olinu casually reached under his massive chair, retrieving a sleek datapad. With a single meaty finger, the tycoon typed a number, a 1 followed by an obscene string of zeros, onto the glowing screen without even a hint of hesitation. Suddenly, the glass walls of the alcoves came alive, illuminating the once moonlit chamber with vibrant glowing displays. Hidali's eyes widened as he realized the glass wasn't just for concealment, but also a high-tech bidding interface. Each alcove now displayed a number, each larger than the last, as unseen bidders scrambled to claim the Varkral. Askar's voice rang out again, laced with excitement.
"Alcove 7 has offered 10 million credits for the Varkral."
His announcement hung in the air, sending waves of activity through the alcoves. The numbers on the growing screens began to shift rapidly, rising higher and higher as the bidders engaged in a silent war. 11 million, 12 million, 13. The numbers climbed with dizzying speed, the tension in the chamber thickening with each passing second. Olinu's fat fingers moved over his datapad, his expression a painting of greed and frustration as he entered an even larger bid. But the other alcoves were relentless. 14 million, 15, 20. Each new number eclipsed the last, and Olinu's irritation grew.
"Alcove 12 offers 25 million credits,"
Askar declared, his voice reverberating with triumph. Olinu snarled, jabbing angrily at his datapad as he submitted another bid, his frustration more than clear. But the response came almost instantly.
30 million credits from Alcove 5,
Askar announced, his tone gleeful. The bidding war raged on, numbers climbing to astronomical heights. Hidali watched in tense silence. When the final bid came, 40 million credits from Alcove 5, Olinu slammed his datapad against the armrest of his chair, sending it clattering to the floor.
"Damn it!"
Olinu growled, his voice overflowing with rage and resignation. He leaned back heavily in his chair, his folds of flesh jiggling with the movement. I guess I'll have to make do with those stupid Rukals for a little longer, unfortunately, he muttered, his disdain for his own hired muscle evident. After everything he witnessed, Hidali wasn't even bothered by the insult to his species, and he said nothing. His mind, however, was racing, his unease with the entire situation growing with every second. The auction continued, its grotesque pacing blurring into a surreal nightmare as Hidali remained frozen in the spot. His body was tense, his thoughts a whirlwind of fear and indecision. What if I just left, he wondered, left Olinu here and returned home? The thought offered a brief flicker of relief, but it was crushed by the knowledge that such an act would likely cost him his life. Olinu wasn't known for forgiving betrayal. Meanwhile, Askar's voice filled the cavernous chamber, his energetic personality giving life to the grim proceedings. He moved with theatrical flair, commanding attention and enthusiasm from the unseen bidders. Round after round passed, and it became horrifyingly clear to Hidali that the only things being sold here were self-aware beings, Voltorians with their multicolored feathers, Grorix hulks that growled lowly as they were paraded across the stage. Even other Jaorians, treated with vicious disdain by Askar, as though their presence was intended more for the audience's entertainment than for legitimate sale. The way Askar mocked and degraded them left Hidali cold with disgust. With each new round, Hidali's chest tightened further. A creeping fear grew in him. What if he saw someone of his own species? The idea sent a shiver down his spine, his dread intensifying each time Askar opened his mouth to announce the next product. Then, finally, Askar's voice rose above the eerie silence of the chamber.
And now, esteemed guests, we have reached the conclusion of the 68th Underground Interspecies Auction.
His tone dripped with theatrical sorrow, as though lamenting the end of an evening gala. He widened his arms dramatically, his crimson robe shimmering under the moonlight.
But fear not. We have saved the rarest, most extraordinary product for last. I promise you, every single one of you will rise from your seats when you see her.
The black door slid open again, and this time only the pale moonlight streaming through the glass ceiling illuminated the stage. 4 Jaorian guards stepped forward in unison, their electric-tipped spears sparking violently, casting eerie flashes of light. Between them, a bipedal figure clad in white emerged, the glow of her garment shimmering in the same blue from the electric sparks. Hidali squinted, his jaw dropping as he realized what he was seeing. It was a human woman. His mind reeled at the sight, unable to process how improbable, how impossible it was. Against the Jaorian's controlling presence, her slim figure and dark hair seemed fragile. She moved stiffly, clearly coerced, her eyes darting from side to side as the guards forced her to the center of the stage. Olinu, as if on cue, did exactly what Askar had predicted. The massive Azarian rose from his seat, his eyes wide with unmasked greed and fascination. "Unbelievable," he muttered, his voice trembling with excitement. Askar stepped forward with his usual flamboyance, gesturing toward the human as though presenting a rare piece of art.
My beloved guests, he announced grandly, it is my honor to introduce the very special closing product of tonight's auction.
He paused, letting the anticipation swell before continuing.
This female human was captured in the Halara system just 2 days ago. A remarkable find indeed.
Judging by Olinu's reaction alone, Hidali could almost see the audience hanging on Askar's every word in their alcoves.
She is no older than 20,
he continued, his tone shifting to a teasing lilt.
and unlike the obedient Vakral you saw earlier, she is anything but tame.
His grin widened beneath his robes, his sharp teeth catching the moonlight.
But I am sure many of you will find her fiery personality quite exciting to own.
Hidali felt his breathing quicken as he watched the auction unfold. The human's delicate figure, her nearly transparent white garment appearing almost ethereal under the spotlight, contrasted grotesquely with the opulence and depravity surrounding her. A deep, sickening dread settled in his chest as he realized this wasn't just another sale. It was a dangerous dance with death, one that could easily doom this planet if word of the auction reached humanity. Askar stepped closer, his thin limbs emerging from his robes as he held a sleek, black microphone in one hand. His voice resonated across the chamber.
I present to you tonight's crown jewel.
He paused for dramatic effect, his reflective eyes scanning the alcoves.
I imagine you are all wondering what a member of such an untouchable species thinks about being sold tonight.
With a predatory smirk, he brought the microphone close to the human woman's trembling lips. She flinched, her hands desperately grasping the edges of her nearly transparent garment, trying to shield herself from eyes she couldn't see but knew were watching. Her attempts were futile, and her fear only seemed to entertain Askar. When the microphone hovered closer, she shoved it away, shaking her head in silent refusal. But Askar was persistent, as if her resistance itself was part of the show. The longer she fought, the thicker the air grew with the audience's unseen hunger. Eventually, she froze, her arms dropping to her sides. Her shoulders shook as she drew in a shuddering breath, defeated by Askar's relentless insistence. But when she finally spoke, her defiance burned through her fear, addressing the shadowy alcoves above.
"You sick bastards might not know this,"
she said,
"but all of you are already dead. For your information, my dad is a battlesuit engineer, and I called him before you took me."
Close to Hidali, Olinu let out a derisive laugh, leaning back in his oversized chair.
If the Shaorians caught you, human, it's already over,
he said to himself, his words unheard by her through the soundproof glass. Askar also chuckled, unperturbed, and raised his hand to silence the faint murmurs from the stage.
Let the bidding begin,
he announced, dismissing her defiance entirely. The auction proceeded as smoothly as it had for the Varkrul earlier. Bids climbed rapidly, one alcove outbidding the next, until Olinu, overcome by frenzied desire, punched a new figure into his datapad, adding an extra 0 in his impulsive excitement. Askar's voice rang out triumphantly.
Alcove 7 has offered 100 million credits for the human woman.
The declaration rippled through the chamber, and Hidali's ears twitched as he caught the sound of Olinu's accelerating heartbeat. The tycoon's breath quickened as his stubby fingers pressed against the glass wall, his greedy gaze fixed on the woman like a predator savoring its prey. Askar waited for additional bids, but silence followed. After a moment, he announced with satisfaction,
Congratulations to Alcove 7 for the evening's largest purchase, the human girl.
Olinu leaned back, a peculiar grin spreading across his face, savoring the forbidden victory. Askar began to explain the transfer process.
Now, as for the transfer process, all payments will be...
His words were cut short as a blinding light suddenly poured through the domed ceiling, far brighter than the moonlight that had illuminated the stage moments before. The grand stage fell silent, save for the faint hiss of an aircraft hovering above, firing intense light below. Various shapes moved desperately inside the alcoves as the bright light shattered the auction's secretive atmosphere, and for the first time that night, Askar's composure cracked as his scared face appeared clear for the crowd to see. Suddenly, a sharp, ear-piercing sound of glass shattering tore through the chamber's ceiling. The intense brightness from the aircraft made it impossible to look directly above, but Hidali still caught a glimpse of something falling, a bright, metallic, bipedal machine plunging from the dome. It landed with a deafening crash, shielding the human woman with its massive frame as a cascade of glass shards rained down. The aircraft light surged once more, blinding bright for an instant. Hidali shielded his eyes, struggling to focus. When his vision adjusted, all he could see was the human woman being hoisted upward by a thick cable attached to a metallic pod. The aircraft above whirred louder as it reeled her in, then began its ascent, taking the source of the brilliant light with it. For a fleeting moment, Hidali thought it was over. The girl was gone, and perhaps so was the threat. But he quickly realized how foolish that notion was. The girl had escaped, yes, but standing in her place on the stage was a machine, now fully illuminated by the power of its own front lights. Behind a transparent protection, there was a bearded man, towering over the Jaorians. His presence radiated menace, the look of hate in his eyes an unspoken warning of their demise. Without the blinding light to obscure his view, Hidali could now see the battlesuit in detail. Its frame was sleek yet rugged, with dark metallic plating that gleamed faintly. The suit's left arm ended in an oversized metallic fist, its knuckles dented and scarred. The other arm, however, was even more intimidating. Where a hand should have been, a mechanical chainsaw protruded, its edges lined with jagged teeth. It produced a low, menacing growl, the noise alone proving it wasn't powered by any electrical motor, but instead something more primitive, hungrier. The figure stood motionless for a moment, surveying the chaos it had caused. The Jaorians flinched, their weapons aimed and ready. At this sight, Hidali's instincts screamed at him to leave. Without hesitation, he reached for the handle of the door beside his alcove, but the panel of the locking mechanism blinked ominously. After many error codes, it switched to locked and stopped responding. Hidali could only freeze, his species being more than just unprepared to deal with intricacies of cybernetic warfare. This was when a Jaorian tried to reason with the human. It was Askar, his voice trembling as he stammered.
"We didn't take your daughter. It was..."
The battlesuit moved in a blur, its oversized metallic fist swinging faster than Hidali's eyes could follow. The strike connected with Askar mid-sentence, obliterating him in a single horrific motion. What remained was a gruesome red smear splattered across the wall, with a growing puddle pooling where the flamboyant auctioneer had stood moments before. The silence that followed was more chilling than the violence itself. Panic seized Olinu. The Azarian tycoon began screaming, his voice cracking as he pointed frantically at the battlesuit.
Shoot it! Shoot it now, Hidali! Open fire! Kill that thing before it kills us all!
Hidali cursed inside, his claws tightening around the rifle slung across his chest. He hated Olinu for putting him in this situation, but what choice did he have?
"Damn it, fine!"
He snapped, raising the weapon and aligning the sights with the human figure inside the machine. As soon as he pulled the trigger, a sharp, piercing beam of red light streaked across the room toward the battlesuit. It was a signal for the others. In the alcoves around them, the Bidders' security teams seemed to have the same idea. The chamber erupted in chaos as laser beams and kinetic projectiles surged through the air, their combined forces shattering the glass walls of the alcoves. Explosions of light and sound overwhelmed Hidali's senses, and, for a brief moment, he felt a flicker of hope. The sheer amount of firepower concentrated on one target had to be enough. But as the moments dragged on, that hope began to fade. The battlesuit remained stationary, unmoving. It didn't return fire or even flinch under the assault. It simply stood there, taking every single hit they had to offer. Glowing hot spots appeared across its armor, only to fade almost as quickly as they had formed. Hidali's grip on his rifle tightened as a cold dread sank into his gut. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. This was no ordinary machine. It wasn't just surviving the onslaught. It was enduring it, waiting. The barrage began to slow as weapons overheated and ammunition ran out. The beams of light ceased, leaving the chamber dim and eerily quiet. As the last shot faded, Hidali's breath caught in his throat. From the shoulders of the battlesuit, two massive cylindrical devices began to rise, their shapes clicking into place with a metallic clang. Hidali didn't recognize the weapon, but its design was unmistakable. Two sleek, black multi-barreled cannons. The barrels began to spin slowly, emitting a mechanical whir that grew louder with each second. His heart sank as he realized what was about to happen. The first burst of gunfire was deafening, and the destruction was instantaneous. The cannons rotated with the battlesuit's torso, their barrels unleashing an unrelenting hail of bullets that tore through the alcoves as if they were made of paper. Glass walls exploded into shards, and even the solid structures between the alcoves crumbled under the sheer force of the attack. Dust and debris filled the air as the battlesuit continued its deadly spin, systematically leveling everything in its path. Hidali dove behind what little cover he could find, his ears ringing from the constant roar. He dared to peek out, only to see the destruction continue. The battlesuit's torso turned methodically, the legs unmoving, as if mocking them with its sheer, unyielding power. Even without moving its feet, it was erasing them from existence. After just 2 rotations, the once grand alcoves were reduced to rubble. Nothing remained but jagged edges and clouds of pulverized stone. Upon witnessing such destruction, Hidali couldn't believe he was still alive. He glanced around, coughing on the dust, and saw Olinu trembling on the ground. The fat tycoon was pale, his wide eyes filled with terror as he clutched his knees. Their alcove, somehow, remained standing amidst the carnage. It seemed to be the only one left intact, as though spared on purpose. The confirmation came through Hidali's implant, a digitized human voice with a cold edge that sent a shiver down his spine.
Which one of you paid 100 million credits for my daughter?
Before his conscious mind could even catch up, Hidali's instincts took over. His rifle was in his hands, its barrel aimed directly at Olinu. The Azarian tycoon let out a high-pitched scream, then a curse, but Hidali didn't even process those words.
Get up,
he growled, the rifle's nozzle pressing against Olinu.
Stand on your damned feet.
Olinu obeyed reluctantly, his eyes darting between the rifle and the destruction below their alcove. Hidali had no patience for arguments. With a swift kick to Olinu's massive rear, he sent the tycoon tumbling out of the alcove and into the open space.
It wasn't me,
Hidali shouted down toward the human in the battlesuit.
It was him. A rich Azarian like him could pay that much, not a poor Rukal like me. I'm just hired muscle.
Olinu shrieked as he flailed mid-fall, his voice turning venomous.
You traitorous scum! I'll kill you for this! Do you hear me? I'll...
The sentence was cut short, not by gunfire or a crushing blow, but by the sharp, metallic sound of a grappling hook firing. The hook struck Olinu squarely in the back, piercing through his thick body with a sickening crunch. His screams turned into agonized wails as the battlesuit's grappling mechanism pulled him with ease, his enormous weight no challenge for the machine's power. What followed burned itself into Hidali's mind as the most vivid and horrifying moment of his life. The battlesuit hoisted Olinu into the air with its metallic hand, holding him effortlessly as the Azarian's pleas dissolved into frantic screams. But this wasn't mercy. It was only the beginning. The chainsaw arm of the battlesuit roared to life, its jagged teeth spinning hungrily. Slowly, methodically, the human began to dismember Olinu while he was still alive. The saw bit into the flesh of Olinu's foot first, severing half in a single cut. Then it was time for the legs, arms, and more. The Azarian's voice silenced by the roar of the archaic motor, the pitch of his agony rising until it abruptly stopped. Silence fell, save for the idling sound of the chainsaw as the battlesuit discarded what little remained of Olinu's mutilated body like trash. Hidali was frozen in place, his rifle slack in his hands. He wanted to turn away, to shut his eyes, but he couldn't. His body betrayed him, forcing him to watch every second of the grotesque display. When the human in the battlesuit finally stared to him, Hidali felt the bile rising in his throat. His voice was barely audible when he finally spoke.
"Is this when I die?"
The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, the battlesuit turned slowly, as if the person inside was surveying the destruction with a kind of morbid contemplation. When the human's gaze fell on Hidali again, it lingered for a moment, the voice finally returning, almost bored.
"Nah, someone has to remember."
Before Hidali could process the words, the battlesuit bent its legs, coiling like a spring. With an explosive burst of movement, it launched upward, smashing through the already broken ceiling with a deafening crash. The sound of its departure faded quickly, leaving Hidali alone in the eerie silence. He stared at the ceiling, unmoving. He didn't want to believe it was over. His mind refused to release the images replaying in an endless loop. The auction, the destruction, Olinu's screams. Hours passed, though he barely registered them. When the Federation police finally broke into the building, they found Hidali still in the small alcove, his gaze blank, his body slumped as though broken, despite the lack of a visible wound. It wasn't until the following week, when he was still detained for interrogation, that the true weight of the event hit him. A piece of galactic news spread rapidly, dismissed by many as exaggeration or satire. But for Hidali, it was a simple, undeniable truth, as fundamental as gravity. The headline read, "Earth Dad looking for daughter accidentally conquers 3 systems."
I hope you enjoyed that story. Click right here to watch another video with the same characters.